Secret Desire. A dark romance novel. Episode 1. First Impressions. The lecture hall smelled of old books and expensive coffee, the particular scent of Ashford University's Humanities Building, where privilege met pretension every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 a.m. Professor Adrian Blackwood stood at the front of the room, his charcoal suit fitting him like it had been designed specifically to intimidate undergraduates. At 34, he was the youngest tenured professor in the English department, and he wore that achievement like armor. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes the color of a winter storm, he knew exactly what he looked like, and he used it as a weapon. Beautiful enough to make students stammer, cold enough to make them regret trying. Romanticism, he said, his voice cutting through the sleepy Monday morning haze, is not about love. It's about obsession, destruction, and the arrogance of believing your feelings matter more than consequence. He scanned the lecture hall with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for a root canal. 70 students, most of them here because they needed the credit, half of them probably still drunk from the weekend. His gaze moved across their faces with clinical detachment. And then it snagged. Third row, center. A girl, no, a young woman, with dark hair that caught the light like silk, legs crossed at the ankle, pen tapping against full lips as she watched him with something that looked dangerously close to amusement. Adrian's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He didn't pause, didn't miss a beat in his lecture, but something uncomfortable twisted in his chest. He categorized her immediately: trouble. The kind of beautiful that knew it. The kind of smile that suggested she'd never met a rule she couldn't bend. He looked away deliberately. Byron didn't write about love, he continued, turning to write on the board. He wrote about damnation with a pretty face. Behind him, he heard a soft, melodic laugh. Quiet enough that most students wouldn't notice. Loud enough that he did. His hand tightened around the chalk. Her name was Seraphina Winters, though she went by Sera, and she was absolutely everything Adrian had spent his career avoiding. He learned her name during roll call, watched her raise one delicate hand with a smile that could melt glaciers. She wore a white blouse that somehow looked both innocent and devastating, a pleated skirt that should have been modest but on her felt like a dare. "Here, Professor Blackwood," she'd said, her voice honey smooth with an edge of mischief. He'd nodded curtly and moved on, but not before noticing the way her eyes sparkled like she was in on a joke no one else had heard. Over the next 2 weeks, Adrian developed a carefully maintained ignorance of Seraphina Winters' existence. When she raised her hand, which was often, he called on other students. When she lingered after class with questions, he gave clipped, efficient answers while reorganizing papers that didn't need reorganizing. She was intelligent, irritatingly so. Her essay on Wuthering Heights had been the best in the class, dissecting Heathcliff's obsession with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of someone who understood darkness intimately. He'd given it an A- purely out of spite. But ignoring her was becoming increasingly difficult, because Seraphina Winters was not a woman who accepted being ignored. She started sitting in the front row. Started wearing perfume that smelled like vanilla and something darker, something that made him think of midnight and poor decisions. She'd catch his eye during lectures and smile, not flirtatiously, but knowingly, like she could see exactly what he was trying so hard not to feel. It was the third week when she crossed a line. Adrian was discussing Paradise Lost, pacing the front of the lecture hall with his usual controlled intensity. Milton's Satan is seductive because he makes damnation look like freedom. He convinces us that falling is actually flying. Is that what you think? Sera's voice cut through the lecture, smooth and challenging. That falling is just flying with a different perspective. Every head in the room turned to look at her. Adrian stopped mid-stride. "I think," he said coldly, meeting her gaze with ice, "that you should raise your hand before interrupting, Miss Winters. You weren't taking questions, Professor." Her smile widened, eyes dancing with barely suppressed laughter. "I thought we were having a discussion. This is a lecture, not a discussion. You're here to learn, not to share your uninformed opinions." Something flickered in her eyes, hurt, maybe, or anger. But it was gone in a second, replaced by that infuriating smile. Of course, Professor Blackwood. My apologies. She didn't sound apologetic at all. Adrian turned back to the board, his pulse hammering in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the fact that when she said his name, it sounded like a secret. He started staying late in his office, telling himself it was to avoid the crowds, to get work done in peace. The truth he wouldn't admit even to himself, was that it gave him an excuse to drink scotch and pretend he wasn't thinking about a 20-year-old student with mischief in her eyes and poetry in her veins. It was a Friday evening, rain hammering against the windows, when his carefully constructed walls began to crack. A knock on his door. Soft, hesitant. "It's open," he called, not looking up from the papers he was grading. The door opened. He smelled vanilla and rain. Professor Blackwood. His pen stopped moving. Slowly, reluctantly, he looked up. Sera stood in his doorway, her white blouse clinging to her skin from the rain, dark hair damp and tumbling over her shoulders. She looked like every inappropriate fantasy he'd been trying to suppress, and she was holding a paper, his comments scrawled across it in red ink. "I wanted to talk to you about my grade," she said, stepping into his office without waiting for permission. Adrian's expression remained impassive, but his fingers tightened around his pen hard enough to hurt. "Office hours are Tuesday and Thursday, Miss Winters. Make an appointment." "I did. You cancelled it." She moved closer, setting the paper on his desk. Her fingers were slender, nails painted a deep burgundy. "You've cancelled 3 appointments with me. I've been busy. You've been avoiding me." The accusation hung in the air between them, dangerous and true. Adrian stood slowly, using his height as intimidation. "That's quite an ego you have, Miss Winters. Not everything is about you." She tilted her head, studying him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "You're right. But this is." She was close enough now that he could see water droplets clinging to her collarbone. Close enough that if he reached out. He stepped back sharply. "Your essay was well written. The grade stands. If you're done wasting my time, I have work to do." For a moment, hurt flashed across her face, real hurt this time, unguarded. Then she collected herself, her smile returning but colder now. Of course. Wouldn't want to waste the great Professor Blackwood's precious time. She turned to leave, then paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. "You know what's funny? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You lecture about passion, about obsession, about people who let desire destroy them. But you're so terrified of feeling anything that you've turned yourself into stone." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no mischief in them, only challenge. Must be exhausting, being that controlled all the time. She left before he could respond, the door clicking shut behind her. Adrian stood frozen in his office, rain lashing against the windows, his heart pounding like he'd just run a marathon. He picked up his scotch, drained it in one swallow, and admitted, only to himself, only in the privacy of his own mind, that Seraphina Winters was absolutely right. And that terrified him more than anything else. Episode 2, Combustion. The next week, Sera stopped playing nice. If Adrian thought his coldness would make her retreat, he'd severely underestimated who he was dealing with. Seraphina Winters didn't retreat. She adapted, strategized, and came back swinging. Monday's class, she showed up 15 minutes early. Adrian was writing on the board when he heard the lecture hall door close. He turned to find her leaning against the doorframe, wearing a black skirt that should have been illegal and a silk blouse that was technically professional but suggested anything but. "Miss Winters, class doesn't start for another 15 minutes. "I know." She walked down the aisle with deliberate slowness, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown. "I wanted to apologize for Friday. I was out of line." She wasn't sorry. He could see it in her eyes. "Apology accepted. You can leave now. But I also wanted to ask you something." She stopped at the front row, one hip cocked, arms crossed in a way that made his jaw clench. "Why do you hate me?" "I don't hate you. Then why do you treat me like I'm invisible? Or worse, like I'm something you're afraid to look at?" Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. "I'm a good student, Professor. I do the work. I participate. I care about literature. So why does my existence bother you so much? Because you make me want things I shouldn't want. Because you're 20 and brilliant and beautiful and I'm your professor and every rule, every ethical boundary I've built my career on says you're forbidden. Because when you look at me, I forget why any of that matters. You don't bother me, Miss Winters. You're simply not as special as you think you are. It was cruel. Deliberately so. Designed to hurt her enough that she'd finally leave him alone. Her eyes flashed, pain, then anger, then something that looked dangerously like determination. You're lying. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell that vanilla perfume. You feel it too. This thing between us. And it terrifies you. There is nothing between us except a professional relationship that you seem determined to make inappropriate. Inappropriate. She laughed, but it wasn't her usual melodic sound, it was darker, edged with frustration. You know what's inappropriate, Professor. The way you stare at me when you think I'm not looking. The way your hands shake when I get too close. The way you say my name like it costs you something. Get out. Make me. The challenge hung in the air between them, electric and dangerous. Adrian moved before he could think, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He meant to intimidate her, to use his size and authority to make her back down. But Sera didn't back down. She tilted her chin up, eyes blazing, and suddenly they were inches apart, her back against his desk, his hands braced on either side of her, caging her in. You want me to leave? Her voice was breathless but steady. Then stop looking at me like you want to kiss me until neither of us can breathe and maybe I will. The words hit him like a physical blow. Heat flooded his body, followed immediately by ice-cold reality. He pushed away from her so fast he nearly stumbled. Get out. Now. This time, she went. But the smile she gave him over her shoulder as she left promised this was far from over. Adrian stood alone in the empty lecture hall, his heart racing, his hands shaking, his entire body tight with want he couldn't afford to feel. He was losing control. And they both knew it. Wednesday's class was torture. Sera sat front row center, wearing a sundress that showed off her legs and a knowing smile that made him want to either push her away or pull her close, he wasn't sure which anymore. She participated actively, her insights sharp and provocative. When discussing Tennessee Williams, she raised her hand with that mischievous glint in her eye. Yes, Miss Winters. He shouldn't have called on her. He always called on her now, unable to resist. I was just thinking about Desire in a streetcar named Desire. Blanche wants Stanley even though she knows he'll destroy her. She can't help herself. Her eyes locked on his. Do you think some attractions are like that, Professor? So consuming that even when you know they're dangerous, you can't walk away. Every student in the room was watching them. The air felt thick, charged. Literature is full of people who mistake obsession for love and pay the price for it, Adrian said coldly. Smart people learn from their mistakes. Fools repeat them. And which are you, Professor? Her smile was pure temptation. Smart, or a fool? The classroom went silent. Someone coughed nervously. That's enough, Miss Winters. See me after class. He meant it as a punishment. Realized too late he'd just given her exactly what she wanted. The lecture hall emptied slowly, students lingering to discuss the assignment. Adrian busied himself organizing papers, very aware of Sera sitting in the front row, waiting with the patience of a predator. Finally, they were alone. You wanted to see me, Professor. All innocence, as if she hadn't just publicly challenged him. Your behavior today was unacceptable. My behavior. She stood, walking toward his desk with that same deliberate slowness. I was participating in class discussion. Isn't that what you want from your students? You know exactly what you were doing. Do I? She was close now, too close. Why don't you tell me what you think I was doing, Professor Blackwood? You were trying to provoke me. Is it working? Sera, her name slipped out, intimate and rough, and he saw triumph flash in her eyes at the slip. Miss Winters, he corrected harshly. This needs to stop. What needs to stop? Me being your student. Me existing in your classroom. Or me making you feel things you don't want to feel. All of it. You can't have all of it. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of his desk, inches from his hand. You can have me stop coming to class. You can have me transfer sections. You can have me disappear from your life entirely. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Or you can admit that you want me as much as I want you. You don't know what you're saying. I'm 20, not 12. I know exactly what I'm saying. Her eyes held his, fearless. I want you. I think about you constantly. I dream about your hands on me, your mouth on mine, the way you'd say my name if you finally let yourself lose control. She took a breath. And I think you want the same thing. The only question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. Adrian's control was hanging by a thread. He could feel it fraying, could feel years of discipline and restraint dissolving under the heat of her gaze. This can't happen. Why not? Because I'm your professor. Because you're my student. Because I could lose everything, my job, my reputation, my career. And what am I losing? Her voice was soft but cut like glass. The chance to be with someone I want because society says the timing is wrong. Because some rule book says we can't. Those rules exist for a reason. Do they? Or do they exist because people are afraid? She moved closer, and this time he didn't step back. I'm not afraid, Adrian. Are you? His name on her lips nearly broke him. You should be. His voice was rough, strained. You should be terrified of me. Of what I want to do to you. Tell me. It was barely a whisper, but it thundered through him. Tell me what you want. The thread snapped. Adrian reached out, his hand cupping the back of her neck, pulling her close enough that their lips were almost touching. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and he felt her shiver. I want to kiss you until you forget your own name, he said, his voice dark and raw. I want to discover every place that makes you gasp. I want to learn exactly how to make you lose control the way you make me lose mine. His grip tightened slightly. I want to claim you in every way possible. Sera's breath hitched, her pupils dilating with want. Then do it. For one perfect, terrible moment, Adrian let himself imagine it. Her in his arms. The way she'd look at him without barriers. The sound of his name on her lips. Then reality crashed back in. He released her and stepped back, putting the desk between them like a barrier. Get out. Adrian. I said get out. His voice was harsh, almost desperate. And don't come back to my office. Ever. Hurt flashed across her face, but beneath it was something else, understanding, maybe. Or determination. She gathered her bag slowly, never taking her eyes off him. At the door, she paused. You can push me away all you want, Professor Blackwood. But we both know this isn't over. Her smile was devastating. I'll see you in class. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Adrian sank into his chair, his hands shaking, his body tight with frustrated longing. He'd meant to scare her off. Meant to make her understand why this could never happen. Instead, he'd just shown her exactly how much power she had over him.